In this lesson, we're going to spend some time talking about network troubleshooting. Now, network troubleshooting often starts with a help desk call from a user. Now, be aware that most of your end users are not going to have enough networking or computer knowledge to describe specific symptoms to you. Therefore, one of the first steps in the troubleshooting process that you're going to have to take is to first identify the scope of the problem. Is the problem being experienced across the entire network, or is it isolated just to a single workstation? In this example, we're going to look at a situation where we have a single user who is connected through a router to the internet. And this user is trying to access a website somewhere out on the internet. Now, when they enter the URL of the website in the browser window, they get a message basically telling them the website can't be accessed. So in order to troubleshoot this problem, we first need to determine the scope of the problem. One of the things we can do to accomplish this is to first try and reproduce the problem ourselves. In this example, we could open up a browser on our workstation and try to do exactly what the user is doing. Alternatively, you could go to the user's desk and use their workstation to try to replicate the problem as well. So in this example, let's suppose that we try to access the same web server out on the internet and we don't get a response either. Therefore, one of the first things we might try troubleshoot the problem at this point is to ping that web server out on the internet by its IP address. Now, in order to test IPv4 communications, we use the ping command. If, on the other hand, we need to test IPv6 communications, we can use the ping command again, just with a --6 switch added to the end. Or you can use just the ping 6 command itself. Now, if you can ping the server by its IP address and it responds, then you try to ping it using its DNS name and it does not respond, this usually indicates that we have a name resolution problem. Most likely, we have a misconfigured DNS server address or the DNS server itself. Either way, name resolution is not working for some reason. Now, if on the other hand, you ping this website by its IP address and it doesn't respond, then we have a different set of problems that could be caused by many different things. First of all, that server itself may be down, or maybe a router somewhere between our workstation and the server is not working properly. It's also possible that everything's working just fine, but there's a firewall protecting the web server that's been configured to not respond to ICMP traffic, which would filter out all of our ping requests. Or it's also possible that maybe the IP protocol itself is misconfigured on the workstation. So in order to help narrow down the scope of the problem, the next thing you might try is accessing a different website on the internet. You could also try pinging other hosts on the internet. If you find that some hosts respond, but others do not out on the internet, then the problem likely exists outside of your network. That's a problem on the internet itself. If, on the other hand, you can communicate with the destination host from the source host, then you know that networking communications are working all the way from your network through the internet into the destination host. And if this is the case, really there's not much more you can do but tell the end user that they're going to have to wait until the web server comes back online. Now, on the other hand, let's suppose that you find that you can't access any hosts on the internet at all. Everything you tried doesn't work. Now, this indicates that the problem resides elsewhere. This could indicate, for example, that something's wrong with your organization's network, or maybe something's wrong with your organization's connection to the internet. Now, be aware that most organizations connect to the internet through a single router, and this router connects to another router at your ISP's location. Now, the first troubleshooting step you can take in this scenario is to first try and ping your workstation's default gateway. And if you get a response back, it indicates that the router's up and the workstation can reach it. And if this connection works, then you can try pinging the interface on the other side of the router that's connected to your ISP. If you can ping this address and get a valid response back, then you know that your router itself works as well. And you also know that routing is being performed because the packet being sent to the destination network can make it back through the router to your workstation. Now, to further then test communications, we can try pinging the IP address of the ISP's router on the other side of our router. If you can get through your network to the ISP's router, then the problem is most likely with the ISP's network. And at that point, there's not much you can do. You'll need to call the ISP and report the problem because it exists outside of your administrative domain. And in many cases, they're probably already aware of the problem and they're probably already working on it. In fact, for this reason, an organization that's completely dependent upon the internet for their business may even set up a redundant ISP. That way they can keep things running if their primary ISP goes down and has a problem such as we've talked about. So at this point, let's step back a little bit and consider what we would do if the ping test to our default gateway router fails. For instance, let's say that we can ping the near side of the router, but a ping to the other side of the router that's connected to the ISP fails. In this case, you know that messages are not making it from your router to the ISP. The problem could be one of many. It could be a misconfigured router. Perhaps it's a break in the line that connects you to the ISP, and so on. In this case, you may need to call the ISP and ask them to run tests to verify that the link itself is working. Now remember, the network wiring hits a certain point called the demarc at your location. Everything on your side of the demarc is your responsibility. Everything on the other side is the ISP's responsibility. The ISP can run tests to verify that the line from their location to the demarc point is working. If it is, then you know you've got to troubleshoot the problem on your side of the demarc. In essence, the problem exists on our network. If the ISP's line test fails, on the other hand, then the ISP has to go troubleshoot the line from their end. Finally, let's look at one more scenario. Let's suppose that when you try to ping your default gateway router, that you find that you can't communicate with it at all. It doesn't respond to your ping request. Now, in most cases, your host workstation will be connected through a switch to the other devices on the same network. One thing you can do is try to ping another workstation on the same subnet that's connected to the same switch. Now, if you can ping one of these other workstations, but not the default gateway router, then the problem may be with the link between the router and the switch, or maybe the router itself is misconfigured, or maybe it's down. However, if you cannot ping any other host on the network, then you probably need to focus your troubleshooting on the link between the workstation and the switch, or maybe even the IP configuration of the workstation itself. That's it for this lesson. In this lesson, we talked about how you can use the ping command to test communications with various devices inside and outside of your network to narrow the scope of a network problem. We discussed how you can use this information to identify whether the problem exists with a specific host on the internet, within your ISP's network, or with your connection to the network, or maybe within your own local network itself.